Welcome to This is Wealth. On this podcast, we ask, what is wealth? What does wealthy really mean to you? Most of us immediately think of money, but honestly, wealth is so much more than that. If you have health, deep friendships, a supportive family, you have great wealth. My name is Liz Crawford. Get ready to be impacted. You are going to enjoy our conversation today with Elizabeth Fauerso. Creativity, curiosity, collaboration, and a true liberal arts education propelled her on a fascinating journey of professional success. Her work has been about interactions, not transactions. She reminds us of the importance of our humanity in a world seemingly fixated on technicals, productivity, and artificial intelligence. Join me for a great conversation. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I want you to give our audience a little bit of background on your liberal arts education and how that began your management consultant career, because the two don't seem to go together when you think about this most ways.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I was saying to you earlier, when two Elizabeths sit down for a conversation, it's going to be good. So I'm a very proud Tiger. I graduated Trinity University. I went there in 1992. And I had this, I really dove into having a liberal arts education. One, because I really didn't know what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. But two, because Trinity is such an incredible environment. And so as a, freshman student, you get exposed to lots of different things. And I just made the decision, don't know what I'm going to do. And I'm going to follow my interest and my heart of paying attention to areas of study here. So I ended up majoring in comparative religion, minoring in philosophy and photography, taking lots of different classes. In my last 2 years, I think I took many, many hours because I had such an interest in it. And Trinity is such an incredible place of education. And after I graduated, I knew that I wanted to explore and travel, and I had made a decision to go to Latin America and kind of almost randomly go to Chile. And before I left, I was telling a family friend that I was going to go to Chile. I was a nanny in California for the summer, and he said, let me introduce you to this very good friend of mine who is from Chile and who has started this very interesting business in the U.S. and Europe. So I met a man named Fernando Flores, who had a very innovative management consultancy that was really about the way that language and discipline, accuracy, understanding of the way that we use language to create and define areas of work, roles, and this idea of a client and a performer, and just defining the way work gets done and culture gets created through language. Really based on the philosophy of Martin Heidegger. And as luck or providence or whomever you want to credit with it would have it, my area of study at Trinity was Heideggerian philosophy because there was one of the great scholars and experts in Heidegger at Trinity.
Wow.
Serendipitous, an incredible professor named Lawrence Kimmel. And so when Fernando started talking about that, I was in a position to speak about Heidegger and to talk about a lot of other philosophical concepts. And, through studying comparative religion, I talked about culture, and I talked about, and he said, why does photography interest you? And I said, it interests me because it forces you into a place where you are actually looking at the world around you as interesting enough to document. Mm-hmm. And so it makes you feel, kind of puts you in a position of a lens, mm-hmm. literally, because at that time we actually used cameras.
Yes. What, our phone?
Yeah. And so Fernando was thrilled because he was struggling with being able to, he had worked with marketing groups and, people within his own organization that were trying to talk about and popularize and promote the work they were doing. And he felt like it was always reduced down into a stereotypical business jargon that in some ways really didn't accurately reflect what they were doing. And so he said, I want you to write case studies about our work, utilizing our own approach and practices of this idea, this Heideggerian or John Searle concept that language creates new possibility. Language is an action. And I want you to utilize that approach to talking about our work. And so off I went. He sent me to live in Mexico, and I worked there for a couple of years. And then I worked in Europe, interviewing and writing case studies about all the work they were doing.
Okay. Fascinating. Did you ever make it to Chile?
I didn't.
Yeah.
And I still have never been. And so that's definitely on my next 5-year plan.
Very good.
To go. I was actually just talking to a friend about it yesterday. I said, we have to go to Chile.
What was it like living abroad in these different countries and you're bringing business practices, you're trying to uncover what they're doing. What was that like coming from the lens of a U.S. Student and now professional?
It was really formative for me. It was so extraordinary and interesting and really helped me shape the way that I've worked ever since. So I feel very fortunate that was my first experience, going to Mexico and arriving in Mexico City in 1996.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just turned 22. It helped me understand how multidimensional culture is.
Yes.
How important it is for us to be able to have a plurality of understanding the way that we as human beings create meaning, create process, create structure. Because on one hand, I was kind of culturally exploring this new place. And then on the other hand, we were working with very kind of technical clients. So we were working with manufacturing clients and banking clients and, retail clients. And so I was looking on both sides of me as a human being experience someplace, trying new food, looking at architecture, music, making friends, history. And then on the other side, working in that environment and seeing the intersection of those two things and how they're so important not to overemphasize the technical without understanding that the cultural is actually, that current underneath all of those practices. So, and then I moved from Mexico City back to the U.S. and lived in the Bay Area during the, .com 1.0.
Yes.
And then moved to Germany.
Okay.
So it was very different.
Very different.
In a pretty condensed period of time, but all the while working in this environment, I was kind of exploring technical practice, input and output of the way people are working together in these different industries, and also really paying attention to and necessarily having to understand culture and language, and the way those things are constantly pushing against each other. So it primed me, I believe, for all the next phases of my work in a really powerful way.
When I think of the U.S., I think we're so vanilla in so many ways because we are, in a sense, I know we're North America and have, neighbors to the south and to the north, but we're also this huge country and we're used to our regional flavor, if you will, of language, culture, things. And back then you could travel to Mexico all the time, back and forth over the border from where we are. And it's so alive and vibrant and it was wonderful to always be able to go down there. And I can't imagine being in Mexico City at that time. It's so multicultural in so many ways. You have influences over history.
Absolutely.
Then going to the Bay, which is a whole nother, and then going to Germany, which is a very unique culture in and of itself. I mean, I find that really fascinating. And on a young person, how that would have just cemented in you and given you such different experiences.
Very formative. And I think that, if you think about language as, there's literally speaking another language, but there's also like interpreting and learning cultural language, to your point. And I do think studying and learning literal language is very valuable. So going back to, liberal arts, I actually studied Italian when I was at Trinity and studied abroad in Italy, but I was working the whole time I was in college working in restaurants.
Okay.
And so I picked up Spanish, like a very casual Spanish, kind of overrepresented my Spanish when I moved to Mexico City, but I very quickly was able to kind of block into it because our brains are really good at doing things quickly when it's a necessity. And so I had this experience of kind of bumping along and feeling a little bit, on the edges of things, because humor and kind of convivial language is it's the hardest thing to get. But after being in Mexico City for a couple of years, it like snapped in. And I had this experience where one night I was at a dinner and I understood a joke. And it was almost like your ears popped on a plane.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden, then I was like, I got it.
Did you dream in Spanish?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I still sometimes,
Fully
because I really cultivate continuing to speak Spanish. And I spend a lot of time actually working and traveling in Mexico now. But that experience, knowing that your brain has the elasticity to do it, it gives you this sense of possibility. And it also lets you experience what our brains can do, and how language and operating in different kind of formats lets us be exploratory. And then, I did not become fluent in German. I'm a Romance language expert. Like, I can continue to be able to read and understand Italian. I think if I went to Italy and spent any time there, it would probably pop back in.
Right. That full immersion, click in.
I did really struggle with German because it was just such a different structure. But I feel like if I, even at this point in my life, said I wanted to learn German and live in Germany or work in German, I could. Because I know that I have, and I have that experience in my bones of
you can draw on.
Yeah. And so I do think that for just thinking about the way we are, unleash our creativity, our power, our sense of possibility, it's great in that kind of educational experience. Even if you're like, I'm not going to use this language in my everyday, think that it's valuable for students to study other language, not simply to learn the language, but to learn outside of our own kind of automatic programmed practice of how we think about language.
I love that. Yes. I mean, again, opening up new possibilities, pushing on barriers to expand your thinking, your learning, how you do it.
Yeah.
Being uncomfortable. We always say being uncomfortable equals growth.
No, it really does. And I think that, as we age, we become less comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that is, it's easy to get kind of calcified.
Yeah.
And that's a barrier to progress, to creating value, to creativity, to flexibility. And it's also a barrier to continued enjoyment and excitement.
Yes.
I think calcifying means getting stuck and also getting jaded, where you're like, I'm just not impressed with anything, or that didn't excite me. And I always think back to when I was preparing to study abroad in Italy. And I stayed up all night packing and writing notes about where I was going to go, making mixtapes. I try to explain that to our kids now, right? And just the sense of possibility and excitement was overwhelming. And I think, what a loss.
Yes.
When that gets kind of engineered out of us in the pursuit of practicality and being a grown-up.
Or even replaced with anxiety.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or a sense of overwhelm.
Yes.
Because when you calcify, then change feels hard versus exciting.
Yeah. Huh. Okay, so how long did you work in management consulting?
So I worked in management consulting, and then actually I was a consultant in some early tech stuff from 1996 till about 2002.
And then made the change to advertising?
And then made the change to advertising and moved back here. So I had been living actually in London when 9/11 happened, and had been working in advertising. I started doing some advertising and cultural consultancy there. Actually, at the time, I was working with a consortium of wineries and restaurants in California that were trying to elevate their presence in the UK. The UK is a big wine market, but it's wholly dominated, as you can understand, still by European wine. And so we did this very big event and everything leading right up to 9/11, and I was planning on staying in the UK, but that obviously kind of changed everything. It changed everything, both in terms of the way the world was working at that time, but also this personal feeling that I had. I'd been, traveling and moving around by myself for years and years, and I called my grandmother to talk to her. I was very close to her here in San Antonio, and she said, come home for a while. And so that's what motivated me. My parents had just moved back here, having been away. My sister moved back here, and it was the first time as an adult that I had this sense of I've been roaming around kind of a stranger in a strange land and taking all this in. And I had this feeling like I would like to go to a place that I have deep roots.
Yes.
And that my family is there, and kind of explore that place.
Right.
With new eyes.
Right. Yeah, and you come back with a very different view of the world and of your home. I mean, we all laugh how you go back and visit your childhood home and it seems so tiny.
So small.
And yes, and so with a different lens of the world, everything changes.
Yeah. And I came back with a commitment to explore San Antonio as a place with the same level of curiosity, interest, and openness that I had explored all these other places.
I love that.
And and San Antonio showed up to me as like a new place.
Right.
Because things are always changing.
Yeah. And
honestly.
I mean, if I think about San Antonio, then we were on the verge of real growth and changing as a city instead of just, small and medium-sized businesses. We were really emerging.
Really emerging. And I also treated with more gravitas, like the cultural and historic character of San Antonio. Remember when I first moved back, I lived down in the King William area, Southtown, and I would go running on the river in the morning really early. And I remember just thinking, it's so beautiful here. And if I were in Mexico or Portugal or Spain, I would have the highest regard for how this center city looks. And because it was growing up just San Antonio, I hadn't held it in that regard. And so when I let myself almost think of this with new eyes, I was kind of reacted to it as, this is astoundingly beautiful. There's so much evident history. What a special place.
Yes. I know. I think in many ways there's such a deep cultural, ribbon through San Antonio. I mean, its foundings, the Alamo, the battles, the history, and I think to Houston or Dallas, some of the other places, and they're different. I mean, we were a waypoint from the very, very beginning of many cultures.
I mean, we were here before the U.S. is the U.S., and we're as old as New Orleans. And I use that point of comparison a lot because I think people have a clear understanding and more of an experience. Like New Orleans is one of the great historic cities in the U.S., and so to say, no, we're the same age as New Orleans. We're that old, and we have that much history, and we have that much those many layers and ribbons here. It's easy to take for granted, I think, and so I, with my daughter, I still try to, okay, let's go down here, let's go to the missions, not just every once in a while, but let's go. We love to walk in what are now. They reopened them back up, is you can walk through the farmlands that the Spaniards set up, and the original acequia are still there.
Wow.
And so you can see it, and it's such an interesting experience to think, wow, this is as historic of an experience as I would have, looking at the acequia that the Spaniards established all throughout Spain. So I think it's just a matter of kind of holding that perspective
That's
open,
right.
and spending time paying attention to it.
What do you think you learned from advertising that you took with you next?
I think that, to boil it down, two key things. One is that the human being and the actions of the human being and the way that we understand and value things in our lives is at the center of the way everything works. And so in advertising, because that's on a certain level, that is the charge. It is, how do we either create or position a product as being uniquely valuable to and one of the things I would always tell my team is I don't like to use the word consumer because I think it reduces the human being in the mix to a transactional relationship. And I like to say either customer or human being. So the best, most effective and powerful things that happen in advertising is when the people that are creating it understand we're responding to the cultural, emotional, socioeconomic conditions, moral value situations of human beings, and understanding how to position the things that we're positioning as meaningful and valuable in their lives. So, and sometimes you're responding to conditions that already exist and are well understood. And other times you're responding to things that are changing, so consumer packaged goods does this well. They are super responsive to the changing conditions of the rhythm of our lives, because they're the things. To be successful in consumer packaged goods, you have to be used all the time. So you think it's a low price point, I got to use this thing all the time. And so, as an example, when the practices around breakfast dramatically changed, and we as human beings changed our schedules en masse, have changed. We very rarely everybody sits around a breakfast table and has, pancakes, bacon, or even a bowl of cereal.
Yeah.
So how do you respond to that? You don't say, we don't have breakfast anymore, we're out of business. You say, what are the nuances and the different conditions and the things that we can change about the product itself and around the conversation about breakfast that continues to be valuable to that person or evolves into being valuable.
I love how you keep saying conversation around it, because there's engagement.
Yes.
These are not passive, flows in the night. These are interactions, and they're opportunities. It may be a breakfast bar, but you got it in your hand, you're talking to mom or brother or whatever.
No, just this morning, my daughter is, she's, I think probably all our kids are having standardized tests right now. And I'm thinking, okay, what snack is going to be good for her that she can carry, that's going to nourish her and give her energy? And, I gave her a Kind bar. I'm not being paid by Kind bars. But, that has shown up to me as a mom, as a snack that is convenient, easy, that she likes, but that I feel good about, that has protein and that will nourish her. And on an emotional level, it makes me feel like I'm being a good mom by giving that to her. And it's right there at Starbucks. So that we realized, we forgot your snack. Here it is. So it kind of saved the day.
Right.
And so to your point about a conversation, is our lives are not static at all.
Right.
And so understanding that, literally rivers of movement and rivers of changing needs and desires that are happening in sort of identifiable patterns, but also in that micro rhythm of each day, is a big part of it. So I think understanding that the human being was at the center of it, but also understanding that fundamentally our job is to understand culture and to translate culture into insights that are applicable and usable in whatever field it is that we're working in.
You can't. That's probably so lost on most of us as we think about things, but culture is the frame that we all use to view whatever it is. So it's completely understated, but it's one of the most important aspects you can bring is, the culture of Texas is different than New York.
The culture of San Antonio is different than Dallas.
Right.
And being able to have access to, I mentioned that term that I heard from Brene Brown, the reference set. So it's not just technical information; it's also being present in the world, so that you're allowing your human being self to show up in the analytical process. So if you're a media planner, the best media planners that I worked with were people that were very observant, very present in the world, and not only paying attention to technical, formal trends and things happening in the world of media, but they were paying attention to what's happening in the world. And that learning to learn capacity was present in them all the time, so that ambient, informal, halo narrative, story, cultural trends, things happening, they were pulling from that reference set, as well as pulling from the formal technical kind of the vocational reference set that was
very good
emphasized in that discipline.
As you're talking, I'm sitting here thinking, I hate my phone. Oh wait, I love my phone. If we're staring at a screen, we're missing the cues of what you're talking about, being able to gather some of those key points. And yet the phone is also the window to the rest of the world, to news, to things that are happening. And so
it's both and.
Yes.
And that's the thing. And it's like, I think about that too, because in my role at Pearl, in my role in advertising, I've always had to be really paying a lot of attention to social media. And I have always thought about it from a professional perspective, but a lot of the things that have kind of come to me as resources or ideas that I wouldn't have thought about with my vocational hat on have come from, honestly, just looking at things on Instagram, or I follow this person, or I like this design site, or I think this is a really interesting voice, or this is a cool place of this guy that talks about, a young guy who, these are the 10 records that are most interesting right now. They're reissues, they're new. And he talks about, this is calming. This is for when I want to feel young again and dance. And just that shows up, and oh my gosh, what an interesting idea. I didn't think about this whole space of Latin American reissues being incorporated into digital space that's super popular that's the kind of thing where you're like, that can lead to a big idea.
Right.
That can lead. So paying attention to that kind of stuff in the past, it would have been that we would have gone to concerts, gone to movies,
re-release,
yes, exactly. Listen to the origin content. Now, I still think those things are profoundly important and will, on some level, become even more so. But I think also thinking about our digital landscape as a place of listening. And being open, even as people our age, like I got ideas from that, and I save it in folders, or I take a screenshot, and I think about applying these kind of shimmers of things that, I wonder if that could be interesting to think about the playlist for this new restaurant that I'm consulting on, or this artist that I could talk to about creating this unique commissioned set of glasses that we're going to sell as part of the brand experience of this multifamily project.
I mean, even what you're talking about, I think for most of us as consumers, I'm going to say the bad word, we don't think about those aspects, but when you walk into a place and it's hitting you on all the different sensory levels, you're like, oh, I love this. Yeah. So thinking about the music that's going to be played as well as what it feels like and looks like to be in there. I mean, that's the bow on top of everything, is you've tied it all together. Yeah,
because if you think about it again, that's back to that human being at the center of where do we like to go? Why do we like to go there? And what are the characteristics that are connecting with us on these multidimensional levels that create that emotional response? Yes. And I think I mentioned to you when we were first talking that one of the questions that I ask when I start a project with anyone is I say our first session is you're going to come to the table and you're going to talk about a place that has been transformational to you, deeply meaningful to you, or defines you. And that could be your grandmother's kitchen table. It could be, that you hiked to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. It could be as large, small, but let yourself roam around inside your memories and let that out, because then it stimulates all of us feeling like human beings. It puts us as human beings at the center of our planning conversation.
Well, you've turned your emotions on.
Exactly.
So now you can feel. Now you're not just thinking vocationally. Exactly.
Because so often, I think we've all had this experience where in a meeting, we're having conversations with a leadership team. And a lot of times people will inherently revert to their expert self. Yes. Look, I'm the legal guy in the room, so I'm always going to be listening for risk, and I want to talk to you about that. Or I'm just the finance guy. I'm the finance woman, and so that's the slice of the pizza that you fit. Right. Versus, hey guys, we're all in this conversation creators of a place or creators of an experience that need to be valuable to other human beings. So first, let's get the humans in here. And there will come a time when we will call upon that expertise, but that expertise is not invited first.
I love it. I love it. I mean, you're building connections in everything. And well, that's where you're starting from in this process. Right. And so the output is going to be completely different than if you're just focused on the technicals.
Because if we're disconnected, I mean, that goes back to Fernando. That goes back to the learning I had from Fernando. If we're disconnected first, it is very difficult, if not almost impossible, to get connection throughout the process. And that was Fernando's analysis is, do we understand as human beings what we were trying to do here? Do we understand why?
Right.
Do we understand who is the person who is requesting this and who is the person is committing to perform it? And have we actually put language to those things, to our vision, to what we would declare as being successful and what would generate satisfaction in this process? And so often we're not doing any of that.
Well, the way I think about this is you have this goal in mind of what success looks like, and it's very technical based. But when you go into a place and it's more emotional based, you're like, oh, this is it.
This is it.
And you're selling yourself short for what success is without the emotional attachment.
And if we treat the emotional piece as tertiary at best,
right,
and we're not disciplined about it, then we don't get it.
Right.
And so with development projects and physical places, one of the commitments I make to my clients or the people I'm working with is I want us to stand in this place where we're standing now at completion 5 years from now, and what we set out to create, we created. We didn't compromise it to such a degree that we stayed on budget, but we didn't create the thing that we set out to create, and actually very few people value it.
Right.
Now they might use it like a commodity for a period of time, but when something is deeply valuable to human beings, so it's the difference between, a multifamily project with apartments where you're like, this is fine. It's where I live right now because I can afford it, versus I love it here. And it will be the last thing I compromise on. You're actually de-risking that relationship. And on a certain level, it's very imprudent to turn things that are emotional into commodities.
Right.
Because as we know, commodities are the things that are fungible and are compromised. They can be compromised.
It becomes a transaction and you can cut transactions. Whereas if it's an emotional fulfillment,
exactly,
you're not going to let go of that.
No, it's like I'm not going to sell my wedding ring.
Right.
That would be the last thing I would sell.
Right.
Versus, if times get tough, this watch that, someone that I bought when I was, in flush times, but now I'm not, I could sell that because that's just a thing.
Right. Exactly.
And so it makes all this sense in the world when we're talking about it, but it's amazing how much in process we're not attending to as a discipline, creating places that are deeply meaningful to the people that we're creating them for, and on a certain level to ourselves. That.
So when you take people and you're asking them to sit down and tell you something that's meaningful to them, I mean, how does that unfold? What does that look like in a real life situation?
So we will go around, and I've done it in groups, small groups, 4 or 5 people, or a board of 40 people.
Wow.
The board of 40 people takes a lot more time.
Gotta have snacks.
Gotta have good snacks and good lighting. But what I do is I listen for and identify the threads and the way that these stories kind of aggregate around themes. And oftentimes what you start to hear and what emerges is there's a lot of universality, but lots of times there's cultural nuance specific to that organization or that group of people. So it's both. So on the universality piece, what I observe is that it's always multisensory. And I will bring that up to everyone's attention. And because they just talked about it, they'll start paying more attention. I'm like, you all talked about what the place smelled like.
Yes.
Almost everyone will bring that up.
And you wouldn't have brought it up on a vocational.
No, so when you're thinking of a development plan, you're not going to say, well, what does it smell like? And without that first conversation, if I were to say to a group of developers, well, what should this place smell like? That would seem like a crazy conversation.
Yes.
Right? Versus if we just had a conversation and everyone in that room said, well, when I would go into my grandfather's garden, he was originally from Austria, and he just had this incredible bed of always these heritage roses, and I will never forget that smell. Or when it was my special places where my husband and I got engaged, and it was on our little balcony in our first apartment, and we always had coffee there, and I always just remember the quality of the light in the coffee. what it smells like, what it sounds like. People will talk about that a lot too. Yeah, I was out, for me, it's where I would go with my best friends hunting, and we, walking on that caliche and hearing that grit. And it was like, we're off the road. Now we're heading to adventure. So
that feeling of excitement. Yeah. It's connected to your brain and your memories. Absolutely.
Yes. And so the visual is one part of it, but it is not the dominant part when people talk about their memories, experiences, and things that drive meaning. And so then we can start identifying these themes. And so that universal experience helps open up the aperture into what do we pay attention to when we're creating meaningful things. Then the unique cultural things are, a team of leaders is the unique cultural amalgamation of this group. And so what are the themes that emerge? You can hear people talking about, it could be that this team is really emphasizing culinary things, or they're emphasizing a sense of adventure, or they're emphasizing, the care of the way things were made. And so identifying those themes helps us set the stage for what are we going to emphasize on this project from the creator standpoint.
Right.
Then when it comes to understanding our end user, I can frame the same kind of conversations with them. Because a big part of what I studied in advertising and what I did was called the strategic planner. And that person is doing research of end user, qualitative and quantitative, and research of market conditions, so that we can understand where are we, who's there, and how do we show up as valuable to them. Methodologically, what I really experienced over time is a lot of the kind of, I would say, traditional methodology of research doesn't pay enough attention to methodological impact on the outcome of the research. So if you're just asking someone directly, what do you want to give your child for breakfast? You're going to get a certain answer. And if that's the only question you ask, you're going to miss all this other nuance, which is, when do you feel most proud as a parent? When do you feel most connected to your child? When do you feel most disappointed in yourself? And then you're going to hear all these other things that are driving that human being, and you can bring that insight into how you're solving those problems and emphasizing the things in their life that are bringing them joy. But they're not going to answer that question directly, because we're not, particularly in our culture, we're not trained to emphasize ourselves as multidimensional.
Or to draw on those other pieces for your answer.
Yeah. You're just like, I'm always in a hurry, and, I mean, we're grabbing what we can. And so then, again, most people will give that same response.
But as you were talking about those things, I'm like, well, whatever is easy. And then as you bring up these other things, I'm like, my answer's going to change based on the questions you ask me.
Exactly. So if you say whatever's easy, and I would always say this to my team when I was in advertising, I would say, if the answer is A, obvious, and B, applicable to 99% of the people we're talking to, it's not an insight.
It's the wrong answer.
Right. So like I would see these briefs and from sometimes young people on my team, insights. Hispanic moms care deeply about their children and try very hard to provide good nutrition for them. I'm like, that is not an insight.
Right. That's something that
all moms everywhere. And I would always say, and if the inverse of this insight is either absurd or speaking to a psychotic person, it's not an insight.
Yeah.
Now, you can get insights in going deeper and getting more of that ambient reference set around them. And that leads you to interesting spaces where you get an emotional response, whether it's about cereal or a house or anything that we're doing.
I love everything about the conversation ignore the surface and go deeper. And our society has gotten a bit transactional in most things. And I even think about the political situation, and, X now is just this banter back and forth. Yeah. It's all surface. There's no depth. But if you start to go deeper, you make connections, and that changes the whole conversation.
Right. It's when we esteem each other as whole people, it gets harder to hate. Yeah. It gets harder to reduce into a consumer. It gets harder to dismiss, because the complexity, but first you have to hold yourself in that way.
Yes.
And so I think the danger of what we're being trained into now is everything bite size, including the way that we experience ourselves. And as a parent, it's very challenging. As a person who's developing places and experiences, I feel even more of an accountability with the kinds of clients I'm working with to lean into that, because that is fundamentally our human beingness. And it exists in everything we're doing, whether it's as a financial advisor, as someone who's building apartments, as someone who's creating a shopping center, as someone who's working in public education. I'm working with a lot of municipalities. And the municipalities, whether they're the size of a major city or a small town, the stakeholders involved are all saying the same thing. How do we create something that is truly an expression of our unique culture, that will last, and that will inherently create meaning and value for the people that are using it? And so on some level, we're fighting against an algorithmic model that is dissecting us and segmenting us into finer and finer buckets, versus pulling us into those themes,
a thread that weaves you all together,
that we can relate to, and that inside those themes where we see each other as human beings, the diversity of our experience and who we are can show up as interesting, additive, necessary, meaningful, instead of I hate you, combative, derogatory, or most profoundly scary.
So let's keep on that conversation. And AI is encroaching on all of our vocations. It's coming more and more into our lives. I think we're at the phase right now where you're getting productivity increases. Monotonous, repetitive work can be assumed by AI to some degree. For me in our industry, I think we've seen kind of this AI come in sooner. I mean, we had robo-advisors that were going to change the world and all of this. And what you find is people value human judgment. So AI is great to a certain point, but then I want to look somebody in the eye. I want to see if they're looking me in the eye. Are they sweating? Are they, not able to hold my gaze? I mean, all of these are such cues that we're built for. We're built to assess situations very quickly with, visual data. And on the one hand, so I think that stays, but how do we utilize AI to our advantage? I tell my people, well, now you have more capacity to think, to really problem solve, to get in the person's shoes and think about what are their values, what's important to them, how can I help solve this for them, what are my opportunity sets, what's going to work, what's not, what are the pros and cons of each situation. And then I think about our students, and I think that critical thinking skills were lost long ago. But if I look forward in the world, maybe that's what's most important coming up.
I mean, I think this idea of liberal arts, which, I've been kind of ruminating on it since our first conversation, is it democratized a way of being that I think on a certain level really became this sort of cultural focus in the Victorian period, where this idea of a well-rounded person, and it was an upper class idea, very much so. It was a position of privilege in which you had the time to explore the world. And that was a period of exploration. It was kind of this ability to move in the world in a different way. And so learning different languages, studying the natural world, being a voracious consumer and learner of different areas of creative expression and art, and having the sense of being a well-rounded cultural person, but not solely cultural in creative culture, but also in what we now know as STEM, right? And the practice of or the structure behind liberal arts in some ways was a democratization of that kind of experience, where it was saying, hey, in students in elementary and high school and in university, we're thinking of this multidisciplinary approach to giving people a start in their life where they can where we're inculcating exploration, curiosity,
yes,
multidisciplinary exposure, so that vocational idea where you get funneled into one path and you don't get a chance. And that for so many years in human history, unless you were at this very exalted level, everybody, if your father was a farrier or had a cheese shop or this, that is what you did.
Yeah. That was your apprenticeship. That was your mastery.
Right. And so this idea of being well-rounded, I think, is underneath that, but also the experience of having space and time to be curious, to explore, to value your experience engaging in content and learning and things less known to you, and valuing that and having a sense that you have a position in which you can do that. Because for so long that was a position of extraordinary privilege, and in a lot of ways it still is. And so this idea that, and you use the perfect term, productivity. We are never going to be more productive now than the algorithms that are being developed through AI. It's just simply, it's impossible. In that definition of productivity, which is just output. Right. So that then creates space, should create space, open up space for us to give ourselves permission and value in every field. Exploration, curiosity, empathy, collaboration, also room and time to be human. There's a term, and I was actually talking about this in a meeting with developers, because we were talking about what do we want the space to feel like and who are we targeting with this very special residential project. And one of the guys said a flaneur. And a flaneur is a obviously a French term that referred to, I think it was, the turn of the century, a person who just walked around the city all day. And they weren't necessarily wealthy. They could be really kind of they could be, but they could also be really kind of a vagabond, walking around, observing and just kind of reveling in the life around them. And
a tourist.
Yeah, a tourist in life, And the idea of, if we valued, think about the last time, and I mean, I'm not great at this because now I'm, starting my own business and work, that you just walked around a part of our own city. We do that in these slivers of time when we're on vacation, but we don't do it almost at all in our own lives, because our emphasis is so heavily weighted to being productive. And it's so deep inside of us, this value of productivity, that it's not solely related to my boss said, or I have to get this thing done. It's actually so wedged inside of us that it's how we value ourselves. And so I've thought a lot about that of, well, what would it look like when this idea of our reference set, which can only be established and continuously stimulated and cultivated by continuing to make time to be a listener, to be a explorer. And being an explorer doesn't mean, you don't have hitting the high seas. Yeah, I could literally be, I could be an explorer in my own neighborhood. When I first moved to Castle Hills, it was like this, I'd never spent any time in that neighborhood. I was like, wow, there's so many cool secret mid-century gems in this neighborhood. So for the first, and it was actually during COVID, because we moved there right before COVID, I walked all over all the time, and I was a tourist in my neighborhood, and it was so fun and interesting. As soon as we locked back into productivity schedule, I stopped doing that. That, I think, is the space. And what that implies is that the skill set of being human needs to be reintroduced to ourselves.
I couldn't agree more.
And that's not going to be easy. Our systems aren't set up that way. The way we understand and value ourselves first and foremost, and certainly each other, there's very few spaces where that is consistently showing up. And I think this idea that creativity is the domain of the creative person,
right,
is also a thing to break apart.
Yes, I agree.
Because, and a very good friend of mine is a woman named Sherry Kafka Wagner, and she's writing a book about this guy named Paul Baker, who was a professor at Baylor. And his whole vision and really mission in his life was there is methodology that we can replicate in which everyone can access creativity. And that creative process and understanding yourself as a creative person is valuable in any area of your life and in any vocation or work that you
Absolutely. One of our founders is 87, and so you can imagine the technology shifts that have come in his life. And, 10 years ago, he would walk around the office saying, tell those young people the answer's not in the black box, the computer, And that's exactly what he meant, is that's going to regurgitate things for you, but that's not the answer. The answer is deeper. You've got to be able to take that information, apply it to the situation at hand, and creatively come up with what are the options.
And if we think of the output of AI and that extraordinary, incomparable level of productivity as a tool, not as the destination, not as the outcome, not as the value, but as a tool that is part of the methodology that's in our human toolbox, one piece. And the other piece is all the things that we're talking about, is how we emotionally connect and the relationships that we have. Because when you're talking about someone valuing human judgment, what they're really valuing is a human being and a relationship with that person.
Exactly. Understanding their needs, understanding their position.
Connecting with them as a human, because so little of what we're doing is actually logical. This more than, the financial markets are in a lot of ways profoundly emotional.
Yeah.
And engaging in that space is actually a very emotional experience.
Yes, and it shouldn't be to some degree. You need to leave emotion out of it to really be successful. Emotions will derail you in investing long term.
But as a human being, the only way that I can, I feel very uncomfortable with the idea of on my own. I don't care how great the system is or how great the algorithm is. I want to sit across from my friend, my financial advisor, Roberto, who I have known for more than 10 years, who says, let's talk.
Right.
And the first thing he talked to me about is, tell me what would make you feel satisfied, safe, and inspired in 5 years.
Right. Because the reason why investing is emotional is because it is connected to our lives, our goals.
Exactly.
This is my nest egg. This is what I want to do. So fear pops up.
Right.
We always say,
the relationship that I have with my financial advisor is honestly as someone I consider a very trusted advisor and a friend. And if I didn't like him as a human being, I would not work with him.
Perfectly said. You should be in a relationship with somebody you fully trust, who is looking out for your needs, who cares about you, and who knows what this is for.
Right.
It's not a transaction.
And then that's an effective relationship, because even when things get weird, and they're weird right now, I feel different than I would if I didn't have that advisor and I was just doing it myself, or I was looking at that relationship as wholly transactional.
Absolutely.
And if you think about anything that we're doing, is there any place where we're like, I really don't care about the form of the relationship that I have, if it's an architect that I'm working with, if it's a team of people that I'm starting a company with, the relationship and the culture of that dynamic is so important. And it either makes it feel like an adventure, like it's interesting, like I want to spend my time and my energy there, or it feels like a drudgery.
Yep. Drains you.
Or it feels scary, combative, and profoundly unpleasant. And when we get scared, that's when we're our worst selves.
Irrational.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Even when you were talking about walking your neighborhood during COVID, and exploring it and experiencing it, because of the conversation we've had, I'm imagining a sunny day, some clouds in the sky, a little rustling in the trees. I mean, that painted a whole different experience in my head than had we not had this conversation. And had you said I walked around my neighborhood, I would just think,
right, looking, because that part of your consciousness and who you are as a human being, we turn off during our professional. And just by talking about it, it turns right back on.
Yeah, that's amazing. So talk to me, one of the biggest, best known projects you've worked on was the Pearl Brewery.
Yes.
I mean, just a phenomenal project. It's known across the world. It is an incredible place to visit. And again, I think why is because you made interesting space that's connected to the historical aspect of it, yet you wove in the culture. I mean, just the little things all over. Talk a little bit about that.
You know, the thing I think about the process of working at Pearl that was so special is from the beginning, the charge was this needs to be a very special place of, by, and for San Antonio. And our owner, Kit Goldsberry, also said, and what I'm passionate about is culinary experiences and education, historic preservation, and the celebration and stimulation of culture. I don't think he said it that clearly. I think and when we first said, well, I think someone said, what do you want to do? He said, something cool. And
you read into it.
Like, to him, something cool means that.
Yeah.
So we had a direction, and we had a team of leaders at that time in the core people that were developing it. You know, Bill Schoen was there from the very beginning. I came in early, Craig Wilson, that we all kind of aligned with each other, that we have a clear sense of what these themes are and what we're committed to. We don't know exactly how to do it, and there's not a clear model in front of us, because that's part of, I think, what Pearl demonstrated is
exactly,
you know, that give yourself the room to explore and design outside of that model. And it's certainly not the only place in the world that's doing that, but I think particularly in, you know, sort of market grade mixed use real estate, you don't see it a lot. And so the room that we had, it was like a learning lab, and that was beyond the access to capital, the time that we had that we were granted by the ownership structure to say, I want to get this right. I want it to be meaningful. I want to stand here and be surrounded by people that feel connected to this place like it's for them, and I want it to last for generations. And so we tried we didn't always get it right. You know, we tried putting retail over here and doing this and creating this public space, and it didn't work, you know, around Full Goods when we first launched Full Goods. And then we had the room to explore why. And to then go as a team to other places and say, okay, this is working. Really dig into why is it working? As not just technical practice or the tenets of placemaking, which is a useful place to start. But, you know, I think our learning lab model was don't plug in pre-defined answers or methods. Create the space, hold the space to explore, to learn as you go, and to listen. And so that's what we did ongoingly. And also to invite lots of different voices, both current and also historical, to the table. It's almost like you think about, okay, what are these historic periods, characters? There's this kind of wonky architectural term called palimpsest, which literally means visible layers.
Okay.
And it came from, I think actually it was a term that archaeologists developed to describe, in Egypt, they would use papyrus over and over again because it was such a rare thing, and they would wash it and then write on one side and then wash it and write on another. And that what would happen as it dried and aged is you could see the different layers that were written on it.
Interesting.
And so that's the definition of palimpsest. The palimpsest of place also, if you acknowledge it and then invite those voices to the table, then you can explore and experience what resonates. what makes sense, what role. So sometimes it's overt, like Hotel Emma. We invited the voice of Emma Kaler overtly to be the hero of that story. Sometimes it can be much more subtle. So like at Cellars, the logo is a pomegranate, and the idea of this kind of old world hospitality comes from the palimpsest of pulling back the layers of that site, which was originally, it was before it was a brewery, it was Spanish farmland that was cultivated by the Franciscan orders. And the oldest neighborhoods in San Antonio have pomegranate trees growing in them that almost feel native, but they're not. They were brought by the Spaniards. And so, and a pomegranate is a historic symbol of hospitality, not unlike the pineapple. And so that palimpsest, it's not overt. They're not talking about it all the time. But I think when people interact with that space and that idea, it's woven in. So that sense of that learning lab where we had room to explore and experiment and develop this methodology that to my experience and knowledge didn't really exist, was one of the greatest gifts of the experience of working on that project. And I think a big part of the end result.
Yes. I mean, as you're talking, I'm thinking, wow, what if you hadn't had those opportunities? It may have looked like a ton of other
space
projects.
Right. And I think, the thing that's interesting as I now am in this phase where I'm looking at so many different environments is everything that we're interacting with, we invented as human beings. And when something becomes kind of codified or calcified, it feels like it's so solid that it's always existed, but it's so helpful to remember we just invented this. We invented the structure of a strip mall or a power center, and we can invent what's next. It doesn't have to be like that. It can be, but if you open up the aperture and say, well, what else could this feel like and look like?
Reimagine.
Yeah, and we invented this, and we can invent what's next. It takes more work. It's more emotional because it's riskier. But lots of times that's when you get to this next chapter of experiences and develop something that's more meaningful.
Yes, absolutely.
So, I think at Pearl, that was a huge part of the process. And also listening to the culture of San Antonio. I mean, all the big ideas about programming that I led at Pearl didn't come from me. So when we did our Posada, which became such a big part of at least, that 10-year era of our major traditions at Pearl, that came from our collaboration and listening to Father David. At that time I was leading Mission Concepcion. And, the Tamale Festival came from listening to students and members of our community saying, hey, what do we all do at San Antonio?
I love it. I mean,
we eat tamales.
Yes, you integrated the cultural aspects of the city into the property. And then it feels like it's owned by everybody because of those shared experiences, because it becomes a place to celebrate those together.
It breathes life, real life into it.
So what made you leave the Pearl and start on your own?
I'd always felt like we were in this learning lab, and it was, partially because of the people that I was working with, that we all were so passionate about it, and we were all learning from each other and acknowledging what we learned. And because of my background, working in management consulting and working in advertising, I had always, until I worked at Pearl, always worked in lots of different industries and environments and cultures. Literally moving from different places, but also I worked in automotive and consumer packaged goods and hospitality and, and anything you can think of really. And so this idea of kind of formalizing this methodology that had been developed collectively with the team of people that created Pearl, I started thinking about, well, what would this look like to apply it to really different environments? Because the one thing that you hear a lot, in addition to Pearl being recognized as being really special, yes, but it was funded by a billionaire. And that's true. What does it look like to take those learnings and that methodology and kind of treat it as a discipline versus oh, it's just cool what happened when these people got together.
It wasn't an accident.
Right. And some of it was.
Exploration.
But memorializing it, treating it like a discipline, and then thinking about, well, is this something that I can bring to a small town? I'm starting to work with the city of Blanco, a little town. Is this something that I can bring to the Plaza Americas Mall in Houston? Was Sharpstown Mall. That is not a luxury property. Sharpstown is the most diverse neighborhood in the United States of America now.
Wow.
And this mall serves a very diverse, but primarily a socioeconomic group that's pretty challenged. What does it look like to say, I'm going to listen to culture, I'm going to listen to space, I'm going to look at the palimpsest of this place? And, one of my mottos is, everywhere is interesting.
If you spend enough time
if you just hold it as such. This defunct mall has layers of culture, layers of architecture, layers of meaning in the materiality and the natural environment around it, and it has just as many stories to tell as the beautiful historic buildings at Pearl. It's a different cast of characters that you're inviting to that table. And then how does that get reflected in the next chapter in a meaningful way to that community? And so I wanted to roam around and try this. I was turning 50, and my grandfather, who I never met, but he was a great entrepreneur. He started his own business when he was 50.
Okay.
And it was called the Central Texas Telephone Company, and he brought telephony into the small towns in the hill country. It was based in Killeen. And I had always had this kind of entrepreneurial instinct, but I had always worked for pretty large size companies. And I thought, well, you know what, if not now, then when? And I also acknowledge about myself that I like to be in the formative strategy period versus the operating period. And I think there's a deep connectivity between design and creation and the implications on operating, but being in the operating phase is really different than the creation phase.
Absolutely.
So I thought, well, let's take it on the road and see what happens.
Well, I can't wait to see the result of some of these projects.
Yeah, it's been really gratifying to see the receptivity from people. I think the volatility that's around us right now is scary and it is discomforting. But I think that some of the breakdowns that have happened with things that seemed very solid. So I would say in real estate, the way that the office market has so dramatically changed so quickly. Right. I think it's kind of unloosed some things that felt like this model always works, this formula works, and the leaders in the industry are saying, okay, well, we're not going to get stuck here. We're going to explore how to be responsive to the changing conditions of the human beings that are using these spaces.
Listen.
And a lot of them will acknowledge, I don't really know how to do that. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that to me is a sign of great leadership and strength is as an adult, as a fully formed adult and a leader in your space to say, I don't know what to do, but I am going to listen, I'm going to collaborate, I'm going to explore, and I'm going to eventually create. And that is how we move in a dynamic way through these periods of time. There's a lot of people in these industries, whether it's city leaders, developers, people in hospitality that are saying just that. And so it's the receptivity of engaging in this practice has been really exciting.
Listen, I think this is transformational. It's the kind of process change that we need. I mean, just to invite curiosity, learning, and creativity back into our day-to-day environment, I think changes who we are. All of a sudden, we become more fulfilled. Everything has more meaning. It's richer texture.
Yeah,
it's not just so two-dimensional. All of a sudden, it's multi, and that changes the feeling of work.
Yes, it does. It really does.
I think that's really needed because I think burnout and, the repetitiveness, the burden, the stress, that's what we all feel. But if we could open up and have this bloom of these positive things, then wow, that's exciting.
And esteem that I have permission. I give myself permission to operate like that in the world. And some of the most valuable experiences and things, skills, I will call them, that I feel at this point in time professionally have come from me giving myself space to explore.
Yeah.
You know, I still go to Mexico a lot, and I don't even call it a vacation. You know, I just went a year ago to Guadalajara with one of my best friends, and I said, I want to show you this city. I love this city. And we did. We went to furniture workshops and design spaces and met with architects, but we were on vacation, and I was taking a million pictures and absorbing it. And that experience of that time, I was able to apply to so many different spaces of work. Not necessarily a clean linear thing like I'm going to source furniture from that place, but it was so interesting to see a multi-generational family working in this space and the way that they talk about it and the character of that place. Working with a multi-generational family saying, I want to create a space that expresses our legacy. So I think, where is legacy expressed? What does that look like and feel like and smell like?
Yes.
So it's not going productively from here to here.
Right.
It's that reference set where you give yourself the confidence or allow yourself to experience the world like, I'm going to take this in and it's going to come out in other parts of my life in a way that will create value for other human beings.
I think of the Family Circus cartoon with the dotted line of where the child went.
Yes.
He didn't go from here to here. He went all over.
The handprints.
But I love that because it comes out in multiple places in multiple ways. Each time a little bit different, but same source.
And at the end of the day, and this is what's also interesting, is that actually if we're looking at precise measurement, when I say value, I mean value to how we experience things and feel things emotionally, but I also mean value financially. That products that show up in the world that people have an emotional connection to are more valuable. And that's the thing with real estate and development is it's a building that is not used is a defunct asset.
Right. It's a bad investment.
Yeah. And a building that is filled with human beings clamoring to get in and use it is profoundly valuable. And so how do we prejudice and preference the latter? Right. And understand that the former is a specter of turning everything into a commodity.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So as we're talking the whole time, I'm thinking about kids coming out of college and getting started and for so long we've trained technicals in many ways and reduced exploration and curiosity, but all of a sudden as we're talking, I'd be excited if I was coming out of school and the opportunity set was think, create, unleash your potential. What advice would you give to kids that are venturing out there?
I would say that if you hold that, and again, I mean, I'm not an expert on this, and this is a very scary and strange time. So, but I think if we hold that our human beingness is irreplaceable, I cannot be replaced by a tool. An AI is a tool. Even if it is an extraordinary tool that is a level of sophistication that is unmappable right now. But it is a tool. And I will treat it as such. And I can empower myself by understanding how to use it well. But I will hold it as a tool. And I will hold my humanity and cultivate my humanity, my creativity, my empathy, my ability to collaborate, my instinct to explore, which all of us have. I mean, you watch kids, and it's a stereotypical thing to talk about, but when I lived at Pearl for a year and I would look at that green space and kids are irrepressible, exploring all the time, inherently collaborative, connecting with each other, empathetic. You see a kid, you okay?
Yes.
And that part of myself is valuable and applicable in any field I go into. And the tool if you almost think about how much drudge work was eliminated by the development of technology. A faucet in a kitchen. A faucet in a kitchen is not going to replace me because I don't have to go to a well 3 times a day to get water.
Right.
But it's going to free up that huge amount of time for me to do what?
More laundry.
Like stuff. So that sense of, now I have all this stuff to help me.
Yes.
To free me up to be more profoundly human, and to acknowledge also that I have to unlearn some stuff.
Right.
We have to unlearn some stuff. As parents, we have to unlearn some stuff. As people that are hiring, we have to unlearn some stuff. I mean, I think I told you that when I was hiring in my role in advertising, after a while I said to our HR manager, please don't send me any more advertising and communications managers. They're speaking in acronyms and jargon. They are experts of a technology that will be obsolete in 6 months.
Right.
And they have lost their ability to be experts and engagers in culture. I want a philosophy major. I want an anthropology major. I want a comparative religions major.
Love it. No, yeah.
And I think that sense of being able to unapologetically say, I'm really good at learning. I'm really good at paying attention to what's happening in the world and to the people that I will connect with in this role. I am really good at listening. Imagine if you were sitting across the table from someone, because now you can say, I can teach you, or a tool will handle so much of this technical stuff. And if you're good at learning and listening and understanding the role of language and culture, every field,
right,
you will be profoundly valuable in that field.
Yeah, no, I think from the first time we spoke, I mean, my brain has been on, and it's given me more positivity about the future, more hope, more curiosity. I mean, I really kind of look forward now to how this unfolds versus.
Well, I need people around me that I'm overly optimistic. I can be, and so I have, like one of my closest friends. She's always like, "Hey," she will sometimes
bring you back to reality.
Yeah,
bring you back to today.
Temper. But at the same time, I do feel like at the end of the day, what's being forced forward right now is our human beingness. And valuing and cultivating that is more important now than probably at any other time, because there's a bifurcation of things.
Yeah. No, I think that is really the exciting part, is embracing humanity again, and using that as, what's the right word I want to use? That is a skill that you're looking for, that makes a difference, that brings inspiration, that makes me want to hire you, because your humanity is open.
Right.
It's not closed.
Right.
That's just a way different person.
I'm flexible.
You're on.
I'm in. I'm on. Yeah. I'm not
like all parts
shut
are
down.
On. Yes.
Scared, terrified of change, defensive. I mean, that will happen with a lot of people. That this is a time in which our expertise could be an extraordinary liability. Because when we are attached to ourselves as technical experts, and this tool out-experts us, if I am competing expert to expert with that tool, or I'm trying to deny that that's happening, then you show up as a person who is obsolete.
Right. I even think about this in our industry. We see when people are retiring, their identity was tied to that skill set or what they created.
Yes.
And if you're feeding the rest of your humanity, if you're open and fulfilled, then maybe that transformation isn't as hard. You've got other things filling you up. So to me, this brings immense hope and opportunity, and just like I said, it's really, really positive in my mind.
And regardless of your age, like that woman I mentioned, Sherry Kafka-Wagner, Sherry is 88, and she is still an extraordinary learner. And so sitting across from her and talking to her about any subject, she feels so current. She is so current.
Right. She doesn't feel 88.
No, she's in it. She's and her perspective is profoundly, extraordinarily valuable. She's working because she wants to be in the mix. So she's writing a book and she's consulting on projects, or
she'll probably live to be 108.
Yeah, and she's so vibrant because of her continued practice of being a creative person.
I love that. Okay, last question I ask everybody is, how do you define wealth in your mind, in your world?
So I thought about this when you sent it to me, and I, my grandmother, who survived the Depression, used to say, wealth is you make more than you spend. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about that language because she was a very extraordinarily generous person and a person who didn't get stuck either. And I started thinking about what we make and what it means to spend, or on a certain level to take.
Yes, yeah.
And so I was thinking, if you broaden it from just, my sense of spending money and making money to I make more than I take. Mm-hmm. And so I was actually thinking about that language of make time. We use that commonly. I make time and I spend time. Mm-hmm. And if I think about making time, that is both for the, productive, technical, logistical things in my life, but I'm also making time so that I have a sense of abundance of time to give, to share, to have available for collaboration. And if I have a generosity, that I'm making more time than I take. I'm making more food than I take because I love to cook and I love to have people over. I'm making more space than I take up, which means I'm not threatened. I don't have a sense of scarcity. I have a sense of, I can't wait to collaborate with that person.
Yes.
I can't wait for this young person to be in this space with me. I don't have a sense that there is a paucity or a scarcity of space, time, money, anything. It has a sense of abundance if I make more than I take. And that's when I feel best. So when I'm happiest is when I love to have my whole family and big groups of people at the house. And when you feel like the table is full, the house is bursting at its seams, and everybody is full from that, that is when I have the greatest joy. And on a certain level, like when I spoke to my financial advisor and he said, what does wealth look like to you? I said, I want to have enough to always be able to share. Mm-hmm. And I told you I had a quote because this just came up on today when I was checking Instagram, and it was a dear friend of mine who I really admire, and she posted it. It's a quote from Pope Francis, who I deeply admire as well. And the quote is, "Rivers do not drink their own water, trees do not eat their own fruit, the sun does not shine on itself, and flowers do not spread their fragrance for themselves. Living for others is a rule of nature. We are all born to help each other. No matter how difficult it is, life is good when you are happy, but much better when others are happy because of you."
That's amazing.
So that to me is wealth.
That's beautiful. I knew you would have a good answer. No, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much. This has been great.
I feel richer for the conversation already, and I know it will continue to sit with me and continue to stir things within me. So thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Well, there are so many great conversations that come from discovering the true wealth in your life. And I feel that when you see wealth for more than money, you will have true clarity in what matters to you. And that clarity will help you in every decision you make. Thank you for spending time with us. I look forward to the next time you'll join us. And remember, wealth is a lot more than money.